but the city bears no financial risk if the financial projections aren't achieved. So what I'd like to do now, I'm going to hand it over to Peter Albert. He's going to go through transportation. Then Amy Burnell and I will come back up and do cleanup, and then we can take questions.
Good afternoon, President Miguel and members of the Commission. My name is Peter Albert. I'm the Urban Planning Initiatives Manager at MTA. What I'd like to really do with this presentation is explain my role as the MTA coordinator for the transportation issues here, the responsibilities to make sure that this project, as it develops, reflects the priorities of the City and County of San Francisco, the priorities of MTA, and the priorities of the community processes that have gone on, has been my main responsibility. This list that you see on the screen right now is both a list of the public presentations we've gone through, including work with the Planning Commission. I've come before you last year twice, the Land Use Committee, the Board, the MTA Board, the MTA Board's committees, and the Redevelopment Agency Commission. But I'm especially conscientious in this work. I think it's especially conscientious of us to make sure we get the vetting and the technical input from the transportation professionals and engineers in the city that have the responsibility to implement and operate this transportation plan. In doing that, I worked very closely with Muni Service Planning. Muni Service Planning is the group that's behind the Transit Effectiveness Project. They're the people who have the methodology to analyze and develop a transit plan that is sustainable, a transit plan that is efficient. I also work closely with SFMTA's TASK, which is a review board that includes the fire, the police, the emergency access folks, DPW, and city planning, to make sure that as we design a roadway network, it is not just efficient, it's also safe, it's also flexible for times of emergency, and that it meets the criteria of all the codes that apply. I brought the presentation before, or we, as a team, including MTA, brought the presentation before the Directors Working Group to make sure that the directors of key departments, including DPW, Mayor's Office of Disabilities, the Transportation Authority, the MTA, the City Planning Department, PUC, and Greening, had the chance to review and give input to the project as it was developing. There are major projects that were underway that are in the area. This is not the first transportation planning that's been going on in the southeastern part of the city by a long shot. And to make sure that we're paying attention to existing planning decisions and plans that have been developed, we work closely with DPW's Bayview Transportation Improvements Project. We work very closely with the Redevelopment Agency and their Bayview Waterfronts Plan, which has included the environmental assessment. I worked very closely with the Transportation Authority in two levels. One is the bi-county team. The map that you see on the screen right now shows that there's much more going on in southeast San Francisco than just the Candlestick Point, Hunters Point Shipyard project. There's work going on in Executive Park. There's work going on in Visitation Valley. There's work going on in India Basin. And south of the city and county line, there's a major project going on in Brisbane. We needed to make sure that we, working on this project, were coordinating and being consistent with some of the transportation solutions coming out of those projects, and that we thought about the regional projects as well as the local projects and made sure that they dovetailed well, that there were seamless connections, and an overall more efficient transportation plan. In that context, to develop a plan that worked for these neighborhoods, we wanted to use the benchmarks that the City of San Francisco already has set. For instance, a transit-first neighborhood. To city policy, we looked at strong transit-served neighborhoods in San Francisco as our benchmark. We set as goals in developing our infrastructure an automobile mode split that currently the broader area has 66% drive-alone mode split for the commute period. Our goal was to have it lowered to 45%, which is consistent with a lot of neighborhoods in San Francisco, and then to nearly double the proportion of people who are taking transit to work. To look at increasing the walk mode split and the bike mode split as well, to really get a multimodal transportation plan. It's not just a set of aspirational goals. It is the guidelines through which we develop the very infrastructure of this plan. Sizing the roadways, making sure we had the transit facilities, understanding the way transit operates, thinking about the bike connections and the pedestrian connections to make sure that this was truly multimodal and that we could build the best possible environment for the system to operate. Now, to walk through that environment, I'd like to take it mode by mode. We'll start with transit. The images on this page are bus rapid transit models. This is a very important signature part of our transportation plan in the shipyard. And these are images from San Francisco as we're going forward with bus rapid transit in a few key corridors. You've heard about Van Ness, you've heard about Geary. This will be a part of the transportation network I'll explain, but I'd like to start off first by showing how we started approaching the transportation planning. The TEP, the Transit Effectiveness Project, is the latest and most current data and most comprehensive transit information that the city's had in 25 years. I work closely with Muni Service Planning to create as our base the Transit Effectiveness Project, and then to look specifically at the southeastern part of the city. If you see in the diagram, it is one of the most isolated neighborhoods in San Francisco from the perspective of transit service. Not just the Hunters Point Shipyard, not just the Candlestick Point area, but the neighborhoods that are adjacent to it. And the goal in developing a transit network here is to address that isolation, again, lift that whole corner of the city up to the level of good transit service that's enjoyed by so many neighborhoods in San Francisco. To do that, we wanted to start by looking at the local buses that came up to but didn't quite serve the Hunters Point Shipyard and Candlestick Point area. This diagram shows those buses that, working with Muni Service Planning, we identified would be the best lines to extend into the community. They include the 24 to Visadero, the 48, the 29, the 28. If you know these lines, you know that they serve all four quadrants of San Francisco, and they give people in this new neighborhood a one-seat ride to neighborhoods outside their area. And we also wanted to make sure that these would be efficient and affordable extensions, so we worked really carefully to make sure that if we extend these lines, we know how much that costs, we know what the vehicle needs for that would be, we know what facilities we would need in the future to maintain those vehicles. It's a fully allocated way of analyzing transit service. So with the baseline of these lines, we wanted to pay attention to a very important connection for the area. Isolation for transit service isn't just local, it's also making sure, if we overcome this, that we have excellent connections to the regional systems. The regional systems we worked with from the base are BART, Caltrain, and although the T-3 is a Muni line, it serves like a trunk line that gives fast service between downtown and major transfer points. To know the relationship between these local lines and the regional transit services, we're to identify where the hubs would be, to make sure that we're designing the frequencies and the connections with these hubs so that people can pretty effortlessly go from a local line to a regional line. That ends up being pretty important, not just for people who live here, but we realize that with the commercial and the recreation and destinations that are being proposed, you needed to make sure there was good regional access from outside San Francisco to this area. So these regional hubs at BART, Caltrain, and the T-3 interconnect with the local lines that we've brought into the shipyard. However, our analysis also showed that we needed to strengthen the connections between downtown and the new developing areas above and beyond the regional connections and the local lines to give one-seat rides from both Hunters Point and the shipyard to downtown. Those are the two new express lines. We've analyzed them through the service plan model. They perform very well. They end up being an excellent complement to a multimodal and local regional transit system. I think it's important to sort of show how we got to that point that we have right now, which is our proposed transit plan, understanding the different lines, their local, their regional, and their express functions, and then showing that there are key hubs in the area that we're proposing where these lines come together. The Hunters Point Transit Center, which is blown up in that map, is a point where one person could stand and there would be lines taking you to just about every part of San Francisco from that one location. And while that map is up, I'd like to call out the line that's coming in from the the bottom left corner into the heart of the neighborhood. The purple line is the 28L. That's the line we're proposing to be bus rapid transit. Bus rapid transit is like the light rail system that it operates at high frequencies, higher speeds. It needs to be protected from mixed traffic. So to design bus rapid transit, a key part of that is coming in through the interchange that we're working on with the Transportation Authority to make sure that the bus is not affected by freeway on-ramp and off-ramp traffic, to make sure it connects directly to the Caltrain station in BART, so we're designing a multimodal, multi-layer transit station at Bayshore Station with the help of the Transportation Authority, direct access to Balboa Park BART, and then to connect the two neighborhoods as quickly and efficiently as possible and to minimize the risk of that bus rapid transit from being delayed in traffic, which is one of the reasons that the Yosemite Slough Bridge, which you'll hear a lot about and which I'll present later in this presentation, ended up being such a key conduit for the transit planners at MTA to offer a protected right-of-way for buses where they would never have to deal with loading, parking, and mixed traffic. help the buses become reliable. Our models show that the reliability and traffic speeds for the bus rapid transit with such a facility brought tremendous transit mode split increases, both for people making the local trips and people relying on the bus rapid transit to get to regional hubs. The pedestrian network is also a key part of this plan. And in addition to working with the Better Streets concepts, which you should be familiar with if you're working in partnership with MTA, DPW, and the planning department, you'll see that we use the Better Streets plan to identify different street typologies, boulevards, residential streets, alleys. We also use the strength of San Francisco's grid system to extend the grid in a pedestrian-oriented way from the existing Bayview neighborhood into the Hunters Point and Candlestick Point areas to make sure that people had safe and multiple pedestrian options to walk to and from the area. We felt that, like the transit network, to be able to offer transit improvements that address the broader southeastern part of the city as well as the shipyard and Candlestick Point was a very important goal. Two other regional systems that are pedestrian trails that are incorporated here include the Bay Trail. We worked with ABAG to make sure that we had connections to their Bay Trail network, and the Blue Greenway, which offers a pedestrian and bikeway through the center of the city into the shoreline. Looking at the Yosemite Slough Bridge as a green bridge means that it would need to address priorities at MTA that include pedestrian orientation, bicycle safety, and transit first. These diagrams show the Yosemite Slough Bridge in this concept. The top diagram shows what would happen on a non-game day situation. This is our proposal that the bridge be open to rapid transit, bicycles, and peds for about 350 days a year when there are no games at the stadium. This is for the stadium option. In the stadium option, the eastern side of the bridge could accommodate as much as 4 lanes of automobile traffic to help with the egress and help ensure that automobiles leaving the stadium don't impact residential neighborhoods. But essentially, what is always intact is the bus rapid transit service and the pedestrian and bike network on the bay side. The bicycle network as well, working with MTA, I worked very closely with the bicycle planning team. As you know, we've come over the hurdle of the injunction, and we're free now to implement bike networks. We wanted to make sure that the implementation of the bike network was consistent with the citywide bike plan, and that we strengthen portions of the bike network in this area to include bike lanes, off-street trails for recreational use, commute bike facilities that help people go quickly from one part of the area to the other. Again, that's where the Yosemite Slough Bridge became important because of the shortcut it offers bicyclists. And then to make sure that we have the difference between a Class 1, Class 2, and Class 3 bike facility incorporated in the network so that we have that rich variety of different uses that people might want to make a bike trip for: commuting, recreation, residential, and transit connections. And then accommodating the automobile program in the neighborhood includes not just the roads that are designed in the project area, but the connections from the project area to major arterials and to the freeways. Understanding the position of this area and its location at Hunters Point and Candlestick Point gave us access to 2 freeways, 101 and 280, but we wanted to design the roadways so that there would be capacity for special events as well as day in, day out traffic management, and selecting key streets like Gilman, like Harney, like Innis, to allow the capacity to go from the project area to these arterials and the freeways, and to make sure that we protect the residential areas from traffic impacts and protect transit operations so that where there was a transit priority street, such as Paloux, the traffic signalization and monitoring program and the management system would enable transit priority to function well. These diagrams show how we've incorporated key parts of the Better Streets Plan into the area so that there's consistency with the Better Streets Plan and the quality of life that we hope to enhance in the project. For instance, the residential street types include mid-block breaks. These could be pedestrian-oriented alleys or lanes that accommodate vehicle traffic. They're consistent with the Better Streets Plan, but the point of these is just is critical, is that they are nice urban places to be, that the urban design of these streets includes landscaping, includes the dimensions to make sure that we minimize the negative impacts of transportation and maximize the public benefit of open space. Sidewalks are open space. And we realize that through an alley and boulevard network that's well designed and well landscaped, as we have this opportunity, we can build beautiful streets that are also functional. That includes the retail component. The mixed uses that go on with retail include parking, loading, through traffic, transit, and pedestrian. To accommodate all of those complex functions, we looked at such measures as sidewalk bulbs, where they can be increasing safety for pedestrian crossings, right-of-way allocations for rapid transit buses and for local buses, on-street parking to help the retail, and at the same time through traffic on the right kinds of arterials to allow traffic operations that go through the area to be efficient. The boulevard network is the third of the better street types that I'll showcase here. These have a more long-range or long-reach function in that they connect areas that are farther away to each other. But there is also the opportunity, because we're building streets from scratch, to design the landscaping and amenities in the boulevards, the lighting, the street furniture, all called out in the Better Streets Plan, to make these visually appealing and strong identity givers for the community, that people could recognize they are in this area with the landscape and the lighting scheme to really make this as beautiful as it is functional. These are the mandates of the Better Streets Plan, and I think we've successfully addressed them in the plan here. I want to bring out an example of flexibility. It's very important that we understand that the transportation plan is implemented over phases. Not all of the transit network is needed when not all the development is there, but we want to make sure that the transit is in place as people move in so they can adopt a transit-oriented lifestyle and not have to live without transit service until a certain phase. So flexibility for phasing is very important. It is through all the modes. The diagram that you see right here is Harney Way. And Harney shows big changes over the Harney that we know today. For instance, there is no transit on Harney Way right now. We include the bus rapid transit component. On the diagram, that's the right-of-way that's to the north edge of the street. North is up. To accommodate BRT, but then to allow the landscape medians to buffer people waiting for buses from the traffic and people living in a neighborhood like Executive Park from the traffic. We had this opportunity. We used the Better Streets guidelines to do that. But we also looked at future needs of Harney. And if, as the environmental review has shown, that we possibly need to expand Harney to accommodate traffic, we wanted to build in that provision. So the two lanes that are on the very southern edge of the boulevard, they're shown in green, don't need to be fully developed until the traffic gets to the point where that's significant. And then we have the latitude in expanding that, 2 more lanes to accommodate Harney Way and still protect the bus operation and still design a pedestrian-friendly network. However, should we not need those lanes, we have the ability to keep them as they're shown right now, which are green medians that complement the state park and actually add a second layer of bike trails to the area. 2 diagrams to show the game day scenarios. Should the 49ers choose to locate at Hunters Point, we have 2 scenarios, for one for transit, one for roadway. I'd like to walk through a bit. A very important distinction in this plan is that the regularly scheduled transit is the transit that would serve the stadium. Much like the success we've seen at AT&T Park, when people come into the ballpark know the transit lines on a day in, day out basis, they're much more inclined to use it. So the bus rapid transit line, the local lines that come in through Paloux are key parts of transit access to the stadium. We also allow shuttles and special charter buses to use these transit right-of-ways to reward the high occupancy vehicle mode split for the stadium access. We know how important it is that there be access to BART and Caltrain. And the bus rapid transit and local connections offer multiple connections to Glen Park BART, Balboa Park BART, the Caltrain station downtown, and the Caltrain station at Bayshore. And then finally, key corridors like Harney, Paloux, Innis, and Gilman all are accommodating transit as well as accommodating the traffic egress. And you can see as you layer the transit and the roadway network that serve the stadium, we've looked at the capacity. We take advantage of the grid to disperse the traffic, but still focus the traffic on key arterials, to design those arterials for flexibility so we maintain capacity, and to point to both freeways, so not one freeway has the brunt of taking all the freeway traffic, as we know in the Candlestick situation today. And we also find that we have a much faster egress time in this plan than we have currently at 49ers because we use the grid, because we build the capacity, and because we keep the transit network separate and protected from the roadway network. All of these transit features and aspirations are what we're building into the project, but we also have programs, ongoing programs to monitor our success, to use transportation demand management to tweak the system as we might need. They include such features as a transit pass for every household in the development. That's a major feature. We'll see that in some other projects that I'm working on, for instance, at Treasure Island. But what it does is it really creates a huge incentive for people living there to consider transit a primary option if they don't have to worry about fumbling for change, that it becomes part of their lifestyle. We also look at car sharing and bike sharing to give people options to cars and bikes to help them make alternative trips. We look at smart technology, not just in the signaling and the transit preferential network, but also in real-time information at key locations so people can make a decision whether they want to stay and buy a coffee or they want to take the next bus that's coming in 4 minutes. Real-time as opposed to scheduling really does change travel behavior. As you know, in the Muni system, it's been a big success, and we'd like to roll it out not just at the stations, but within the developments themselves. And that concludes my transportation presentation. At this point, I'll be around for transportation questions as well.
Thank you. I had some questions for Mr. Albert for transportation. Okay. So I read over your report in great detail, and it was very interesting. And I guess one of the first things I wanted to mention is you're looking at a higher split of walking and bicycling for the residents there. But I'm just wondering where they're going to walk to. I mean, it's a long ways to downtown, or what do you specifically mean walk? Do you mean perhaps those ones who might have work and live at the site? I like to walk long distances, but, I think it's probably a little unrealistic to think that very many people are going to walk to their place of employment at that high a percentage.
So, thank you, Peter Albert again from SFMTA. Part of the project that really has affected the transportation mode splits is the specific mixes of land uses. And there are a lot of walk trips generated when you put mixed use in proximity to residential. So you have walk trips that might be errands, walk trips that might be to work, walk trips that might be to recreation, residential trips to other residential trips, walk trips to destinations in themselves. And we don't count the walk trips to transit as a separate walk trip. We often count that as a transit mode split, but that ends up being a very big part of it. So in some ways, the walk trip percentage is underrepresented. Okay, so what you're saying is some of this walking is walking and it's mixed with transit use, or it's walking to neighborhood-supported retail, perhaps, as a trip from where you live. It's not necessarily a walk-to-work type of situation. And it's measured at the peak. That's correct. And it's measured at the peak period, so that peak period measures all the trips, not just commute trips. Yeah. But I do want to clarify, it doesn't include the portion of a transit trip that might be a walk trip. I just wanted to put that out there because in our planning, that ended up being important. All right. Well, thank you. I've got some other things. On your sketch, you see your BRT coming in from the south, and I'm happy to see that you've included the part that the Geneva extension, which is not part of this plan, but it's part of the regional plan that you're working on together by county. And, of course, that comes all the way in. It comes all the way into the stadium site and then the transit hub that's near there. But then it returns the other way. Now, I don't see a BRT on the northern side. I do see an express bus, but it seems to me that that's a very important part that should also be analyzed. That is, just within the plan itself. Obviously, we can't analyze something for Indian Basin or for areas beyond there, but I think that you have to look at that same formula to the north, because I know there's some disagreement about the split. And this is not just game day, but the split in general when you have residents there. I know that there's been a contention the split would be something like 63% south and 37% north, and some people feel that the split would be closer to 50-50 or 45-55. So I think it's unrealistic that you would expect people to take bus rapid transit south to go north. I mean, if I'm going to downtown San Francisco or the East Bay over the Bay Bridge or to Marin County, I'm going to want to go north as directly as possible and not have to reverse by field and go south to go north. So, I mean, I think that's important to have a path there. And along those same lines, I read very carefully about your different widening of the various streets and roads to accommodate traffic, which is very important if you're going to have 10,000 new housing units and, all the other things that are part of the development. You've got to be able to get them in and out. A couple places that concern me are the streets of Robinson, Fisher, and Donahue, which is
you know, I know what you have to do is force that traffic north a ways because you run into a hill and you can't go through the hill without a tunnel, so you do have to go around the north, which is where the traffic goes now. But two things. One, I think you should have some gentle curves there instead of right angle turns, because everybody has to stop, make a turn, stop, make a turn. So if that can be made as part of the plan, that makes sense to me. And the other thing is that a lot of these streets, I think, are a little bit not enough lanes, which brings me to another question, and that is, many of these have bike paths on the north and on the south. Now, it would seem to me, obviously, you need two-way bike paths, but you don't probably need them on both sides of the road. You go to wherever the bike path is, and you ride, you know, one way, both ways. There's a lane between them, and so they don't run into each other. But, you know, I mean, I don't see the need to have them on both sides of the street.
On that last comment, if I could, I'd like to clarify. So working with the Bike Coalition and working with our own bike planning team, there is a need to make sure that the bike paths are in the direction of traffic whenever possible, because you really need to manage expectations and awareness for drivers, minimize the conflict. So the amount of property it would take on a street to put two lanes side by side is basically the same amount as it would be if you split it in half.
You're not gaining anything, so you might as well split them out. Okay, that makes sense, I guess, although they should be a separate right-of-way. I mean, they shouldn't be fighting with cars because you have, you know, a clean slate here to deal with. You can put the streets where you want them, you can put everything where you want them, because as I think Michael Cohen pointed out earlier, it's not like you have a built structure. Now we have something that is an unbuilt situation, so you can build it to where it makes the most sense. And I think one of the most important things is to look at your transportation first and make that make sense, and then adapt the built structures to accommodate the transportation instead of, you know, building the structures where you think you want them and make the roads fit the structures. Because it's kind of like if there's a farm field in Iowa where the roads have to make turns around them. I mean, that's a little different situation. It's, you know, that's like a built structure. But I think it's better to make them straighter and then change the building. And I think you have flexibility in your plan that this can be modified.
And actually, we have the Class 1, Class 2, Class 3 system for the bike plan. Class 1 is the separate bike lane as opposed to one mixed with traffic. And what we have is a good framework. If you just took the Class 1 bike diagram out, you would see there's pretty comprehensive coverage to the developments, both Candlestick Point and Hunters Point. We layer Class 2 and Class 3 not just because bicyclists all have access to every street, and they should, but we also took the extra effort to make sure they knew which were the best possible bike routes if they're going to share. So we do have the separated bike lanes, that's Class 1, and Class 2 and Class 3 go through the extra distance of saying these are the best routes to take to minimize transit conflicts, to ensure topography. Bicyclists like to avoid hills if they can. So I think looking at all three of them, you start to see we give a good range of bike access.
No, it makes sense. As I say, I think all those things are important as long as all of these streets and all of these pathways acknowledge the fact that the vast majority of people still drive cars, and that, you know, it's probably going to stay that way for the foreseeable future. And while we can encourage them to take public transit, you know, there still has to be an allowance for people to be able to get in and out if you expect them to live there. The other part was, I guess, in that same, just talking specifically about game day, I noticed that you have gotten the exit time down to projected to be, I think it's an hour and 20 minutes or something. The NFL average is an hour, and I would encourage you to continue to study this and look at it, because, again, you have the ability to, you know, create what you need to create to make sense, and certainly making some of these streets a little easier and wide enough is going to not only help on game day, but it's going to help all the time, because people who are just trying to get out aren't going to want to have to drive down streets where residents are, where businesses are, and stop at every corner and then move to the next corner and make a turn. It just makes sense. Whenever you build anything new, I've never seen anything that didn't provide a smooth traffic path. And the final thing is, I guess, the parking, and I've looked through the different things. I'm understanding you have projecting a total of 31,000 parking places for both Hunters Point and Candlestick, including the residential parking. I think it's 31.8 or something like that. But then in terms of parking that would be available for, you know, game day usage as far as parking for non-residents, I think we come up with something like a total of 21,000. But my understanding is that's when everything is built out. Because it would seem to me, when you first start, assuming the stadium comes before the entire plan is built out, which I think everybody acknowledges that would be the order, that there's no reason why you can't have 23,000 or as much parking as you want, with the understanding that as we move forward, some of this may have to go. And this was the same formula that was used at AT&T Park, and they're lessening the parking because they're finding that other modes are being used. People are walking, they're taking transit. Vast majority are not taking individual cars. So I think I'm optimistic that could happen, but for the first day, I think you have to make sure there's not a parking deficit there. So that would be my feeling, is if somewhere in your transportation report, I think you have to make that statement that, we will always make sure that we have adequate parking for the game day situation. And but our aim, when we're built out, is to have this particular number. And I think those are most of my questions. I think that's pretty much it. I guess the only other thing I'd like to add, and you may comment on this, somebody made a statement to the effect that if you didn't have a bridge over Yosemite Slough, it would only take a minute and a half more, to get around, circling around between the two places. Now, I've driven that, I know you and I have, on a few occasions, and I'll tell you, if you were racing your car as quickly as you possibly could, with no stops, and even, it would take 5 or 10 minutes to get around there. It's a long distance to get from the point of the northern terminus of the bridge to the southern terminus of the bridge. So, I can't understand where that came from, but I know you're creating these other ability for people to go around in a circle, but you're all, without the bridge, it's going to be extremely difficult for anybody, time-consuming and disruptive to the neighborhood for people to get through there.
Well, through the chair, if I could comment on that.
Yeah, please.
The bridge, of course, is a big part of the transportation network, and of course, we're studying an alternative without a bridge. And through community process, we identified a corridor, an alternative to the bridge that uses the railroad right-of-way. So I think there's a solid, feasible alternative to bus rapid transit. The analysis about time, I worked with the transportation consultants to really get at what would be a good figure for the difference between using the bridge and not. And the modeling uses a different speed if the bus has its own right-of-way as opposed to the bus operates in mixed traffic. If we were to make a exclusive set of bike or bus lanes around the slough rather than crossing the bridge, there's the issue of possibly taking the PDR businesses around the slough because they use their curb lanes for loading and offloading. Widening the road would be necessarily taking property. We tried to avoid that. That's one of the advantages of the railroad right-of-ways. You don't get to that issue. So that's why that became the alternative. However, analyzing the travel speeds includes things that the model doesn't. The model in a transportation review isn't necessarily the same as a service planning model that looks at what happens when you have to negotiate every single intersection. The difference between the bridge and the around the slough alternative is basically 4 right turns with around the slough and between 9 and 13 intersections, depending on how we build out the railroad right-of-way crossings. Each one of those intersections in a service planning analysis comes with a factor, the possibility someone might be walking across it. The reality that we have to signalize it so those bus crossings would be safe. And that really does change the travel speed. The minute that I heard talked about, I don't know where that came from, but we did use our consultant's estimate of between 5 and 7 minutes.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mr. Al. Yeah, I think I have one other question, and then I'm done. But I agree with you. I think that's a minimum, having driven that, no matter how you fix it up. And there'd be a lot of disruption to PDR businesses there. And finally, the railroad access, which comes from the Paul Street station and comes directly into Bayview Hunters Point. I think it's near Paul where the Caltrain spur is. And I would like you to take a look at possible usage. Maybe call Caltrain, because that makes a lot of sense to me. If you could have a train come in there, if those tracks would be usable, it would be a great way, because not everyone who lives at Hunters Point is going to work in Hunters Point. They're not all going to work in downtown San Francisco. They're going to be people who are going to be commuting down the peninsula or perhaps the other direction to San Francisco, and that would be a really quick transit fix to be able to bring in passenger trains along those tracks. So I don't know if they're usable, but I think before we tear them out, maybe we ought to find out if they're of use, because that makes a lot of sense to me.
Commissioner Borden? I guess I do. Were you going to say something?
No, go ahead, Al.
I was just going to ask about the transportation study, because I know initially it was discussed. It was on our calendar at one point to come
Right.
to us in April, and I just wanted to know if you could tell us the scope of the transportation study and when we can anticipate that, just because I think
Well,
it's...
yeah, I want to answer the question that was raised, and I confirmed it, which is the transportation plan and the analysis in the transportation plan have been presented here at the MTA, at redevelopment, at the Board of Supervisors on many, many occasions. Every single element of our transportation plan is being analyzed in the EIR very thoroughly, as you all know. We look at multiple analysis. So to answer the question that was posed, all of the elements of the transportation plan are being analyzed in the EIR.
And can you just talk a little bit about what more specifically the transportation analysis is looking at then?
Well, I'll defer that to Peter.
Peter Albert from MTA again. The transportation plan analysis and the environmental looks at a variety of modes, and it uses the environmental review measures for different modes. For instance, with traffic, certainly level of service has been important. Measuring the performance of intersections throughout a pretty broad scope. We actually looked farther beyond the project into the Portland District, into Central Waterfront, all the streets that had a possible connection. In the transit capacity is a big issue, so making sure that we honor 85%, that's Muni's capacity limit. Above that, it could be possibly a significant impact if the transit is overcrowded. That's why our service plan was calibrated not just for the full build-up, but for the interim phases. And the bicycle and pedestrian modes, but there's not quite a level of service analysis, but there is a qualitative analysis that looks at safety issues, and we use those as well, aided by the developments in the Better Streets plan.
Okay, great. And I noticed that in the plan, I know that the transportation network was done both in trying to incorporate the city grid and then take the existing transit infrastructure. And I noticed that it's a quarter mile and half mile to transit. I kind of think that half mile is a little far for people to walk or get to transit mode. So I don't know if that's, in some sections of the plan, it looks like it's a little bit of a ways for people to actually make it to a transit stop. And I'm not an expert on that, but.
And if I could clarify that, so actually, you might be specifically looking at the bus rapid transit, but there are a host
No, I know
of
there are
other
other
bus
local
lines.
routes,
Yeah, so there should be no one more than a quarter mile from any
No more than a
transit
quarter.
stop.
Okay, great. And I guess the other, I would love to explore more of this issue, and I know the EIR is looking at an alternative with the bridge and without the bridge, but it sounds like, there's a lot of work or a lot of interest around that. Particularly depending upon if we don't have the stadium, it seems a lot less of a desirable necessarily bridge than in the other instance.
Well, if I may comment on that, because of the extra square footage and perhaps a greater demand on commuting, replacing the stadium is additional research and development. That's a proposal. Housing units are put in a different spatial location. The bridge actually has more importance for a day in, day out commuting mode if transit first is really the policy for any new commercial development.
And can you talk a little more about the existing rail lines that could be used for that?
There is a rail right-of-way that runs around the slough, and it's sort of parallel to the slough. Right now, we went out to look at the site. We think the geometry of the rail right-of-way could work both for BRT and for light rail. And I did need to mention in my presentation that the BRT was designed to be rail-ready to give Muni the best flexibility in case it chooses its operation. The issues about the rail right-of-way themselves that cause a concern are safety issues, that they're not quite a half block in from the next intersection. So it is an issue that we saw happen with Los Angeles' experience with bus rapid transit. When the intersections were too close to where the rail was coming through and there was only maybe a couple of buildings between the intersection and the rail path, there were a lot of conflicts where people wouldn't expect the bus to be coming out. We think we can handle that through signal technology and make it very safe. But it does remind us that making sure bus rapid transit, if it operates quickly, gets the signals and the priority, it also means you have to stop pedestrian and bike traffic.
Great. Well, thank you. I think you've covered my transportation related concerns.
Mr. Albert, I have a question for you if you include this. A gentleman earlier mentioned the whole issue about PDR, the zoning within 3rd Street and Hunters Point. I assume that when we're doing the EIR, you're doing your transportation study, that if we do green energy or manufacturing on the base itself, there's some PDR that's going to be built there, that the issue of getting things into the Bayview and Hunters Point Shipyard off Hunters Point Shipyard will be addressed, especially for those areas that we believe that new industries will be, will actually move there or start there.
Correct. Peter Albert from NTA. Yes, that's correct. Where the research and development and the light industrial functions are happening are on roads that have access to it for loading and parking. They're separate from the transit. The bus rapid transit facility is in separate bus lane specifically for that.
Well, my question is, we're zoning for greening. If we develop the solar panels down there, the impact on, in this whole argument about the bridge, will help expedite any kind of PDR industries to get trucks on and off the base of a more efficient way.
Is your question whether we would allow trucks to use the bridge as well?
Well, I don't know what your game plan is for the bridge is going to be, but I know that we need to make sure that trucks can enter the Bayview, whether you do catering or you store wood and whether cement, whatever, so you can get in and out of the Hunters Point Shipyard.
Yes,
when
thank
it's
you.
built out.
That's a good complement to the different modes I described. Using the Bayview Transportation Improvement Project, led by DPW maybe a few years ago, we used all of their information for truck routes to make sure that we're designing traffic lanes to accommodate the geometry of a truck. So if you look at different cross-sections throughout the plan, you'll see some lanes that are wider. Some of those are specifically so the truck access is unimpeded.
Okay,
and that's
so
because of the benefit of the BTI project.
Okay, so it's going to be addressed in the EIR.
It is in the EIR.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
And I did have a
Thank you.
question just for, I guess, Mr. Albert or Tiffany Bohe, I'm not sure. I guess it would be Mr. Albert on a parcel here that I'm not sure about on this map, but, and it's a little hard to describe it, but you have the outer circle road that goes around the stadium parking, and it meets Christ. And then to the other side, there's a rather large piece that's near the wetlands, but it looks like a flat area there. I'm not sure what that is and whether that's appropriate for parking or what we have planned on that particular parcel. You know, it's not that important at this particular time to know what that is, but it was a little bit, I tried to figure that out, and I'm not sure what it is.
Peter Albert again from NTA. Just to clarify, so are you talking about the portion that's directly south of Crisp between the access to the Stadium Road and then Aurelius Walker, the bridge? That big sort of wide expanse between the perimeter road and the approach to the bridge?
Right. It's actually a little closer to the outer circle road of the stadium. Just that one area there that seems to be quite large, and it's just sort of a yellowish color. I'm not sure what that's supposed to represent.
They're natural areas and wetlands.
Oh,
Thank you.
Commissioner Moore?
I just want to comment on the transportation plan. Probably one of the strongest pieces of the plan is indeed something which takes everything we've heard about Better Streets plan and implements it in a new area. So I think it's excellent, and I am glad that the plan does not look single-purpose driven. That would be that it's a stadium plan and everything else is coincidental to it. It's the other way around. And if the stadium doesn't happen, it's still a great plan. And if the stadium happens, then the stadium will just have to be accommodated by what is. And that is indeed a real city, the city we're planning for the future, a transit-first city, and that is extending the real San Francisco into Bayview's Hunters Point. And I think I have heard that as one of the strong planning principles from day one on, and I hope that there will be no ifs and buts to modify that.